What happens when a 10-year-old refuses to give up her seat and ends up shaking an entire airline to its core? Imani Jefferson could barely keep her legs still. She was sitting at gate 34B at Sacramento International Airport, swinging her sneakers back and forth under the chair. In her lap, she clutched a worn-out book about space exploration, the one her dad gave her when she was 5. She had just finished an intense 2-week science camp in the city, and today wasn't just any flight home. It was her first time flying first class. She kept looking at the golden boarding pass in her pocket, checking to make sure it hadn't somehow vanished. First class, VIP, priority boarding. She didn't even know what half the perks meant, but the words sounded important. It made her feel important too. Her dad, Christopher Jefferson, wasn't the type to spoil her for no reason. He worked hard. She knew that. He wasn't on TV or anything, but people at his job called him the big boss. And once when they went to lunch, 3 different people stopped just to shake his hand. Imani understood this gift wasn't just a plane ticket. It was his way of saying, "I see how hard you're working too." The speakers crackled overhead. Boarding had started. Imani jumped to her feet and pulled her little backpack tighter on her shoulders. When they called for first-class passengers, she felt weird walking past the long line of people waiting to board. Some of them smiled at her. A few gave her funny looks, like they were trying to figure out if she was lost. She handed her ticket to the agent and walked down the jet bridge, her heart thudding against her chest. Seat 2A, window seat. She found it right away. Wide leather chair, soft headrest, a small blanket neatly folded on the armrest. She pressed her hand into the cushion and almost giggled. This was nicer than her couch at home. Settling in, she pulled out her book, tucked it carefully into the seat pocket, and stared out the window. The world outside looked so busy, like little ants loading bags and checking equipment. Inside her chest, a warm feeling bloomed. Maybe this was what success felt like. Maybe this was just the beginning. But not even 15 minutes later, the moment she'd waited for all summer took a strange and unexpected turn. Imani was tracing shapes on the window with her finger when she heard footsteps approaching. She looked up and saw a flight attendant standing by her seat. The woman wore a tight, polished smile, the kind that didn't quite reach her eyes, and leaned in slightly, like she had a secret to share. "Hi there, sweetie," the woman said, in a voice that was a little too sweet. "Would you mind helping us out today?" Imani blinked. She wasn't sure what the woman meant. Helping? She hadn't done anything wrong. She sat up straighter, suddenly nervous. "We have a special guest who needs a little extra room," the woman continued, tilting her head. "Would you be a big helper and switch seats? We can find you a nice spot a little further back." Imani gripped the armrest. 1,000 questions popped into her head, but none of them made it to her mouth. She just shook her head slightly. "I'd really like to stay here, please," she said, trying to sound grown-up, the way her dad always told her to when speaking to adults. The flight attendant's smile wobbled for a second before snapping back into place. "I know you like this seat," she said with a tiny laugh that didn't sound funny at all. "But we have an older passenger, someone very important, and it would really help if you moved. You're such a smart young lady. I know you understand." Imani's cheeks burned. She didn't want to be difficult, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She looked around quickly. Most of the other first-class seats were filled with adults, all white, she noticed. She was the only black passenger in the whole section. And something else. No one else was being asked to move. Imani swallowed hard. "My dad bought me this seat," she said softly. "I really would like to stay." For a second, just a flicker, the woman's expression changed. Her jaw tightened, just a flash, before the smile returned. "We'll be right back," she said tightly, and turned away toward the front of the plane. Imani sank back into her seat, staring down at her sneakers. She felt like she had done something wrong, even though she hadn't. Her palms were sweaty, her stomach twisting. Was it because she was young? Or was it something else she didn't want to think about? But before she could figure it out, the same flight attendant returned. And this time, she wasn't alone. Imani didn't know where to look. The flight attendant was back, but this time she brought someone with her. A man in a suit with a name tag clipped neatly to his jacket. His smile was even tighter than hers. "Good afternoon, young lady," he said in a voice that sounded rehearsed. "We're hoping you'll reconsider and move to another seat. It would really help us out." Imani clutched her seatbelt. She had already said no, twice. Why were they still asking? She opened her mouth, but the words felt stuck in her throat. The man crouched slightly so he was eye level with her. "You'll still get all the first-class amenities," he added, like he was offering a reward for good behavior. "We just need you to switch seats. It's not a big deal." From the corner of her eye, Amani caught a few passengers watching now. A woman in a beige sweater was whispering to the man next to her. Another guy 3 rows back was frowning in her direction. She felt like she was shrinking in her seat, smaller and smaller with each passing second. "My dad, he got me this seat," she said, voice trembling. "I want to stay." The flight attendant leaned in again. Her voice dropped lower, almost a whisper. "First class is reserved for adults most of the time, honey. You're a child. You'll be more comfortable back there with other kids." Amani's face burned. There weren't other kids. She had walked past every row. There weren't any kids back there. She knew what this was. They didn't want her here. They didn't think she belonged. And now, the way they kept pressing, the way the man smiled without blinking, made her realize something even scarier. They weren't going to stop asking. They were waiting for her to give up, to stop resisting, to make it easier for them. Her hands were shaking. She thought about her dad. What would he do? Her phone was tucked in the side pocket. Slowly, quietly, she reached for it. But just as she grabbed it, the man straightened up and said something that made the whole situation 1,000 times worse. The man glanced at the flight attendant and gave a quick, tight nod. "If you can't move on your own," he said calmly, "we'll have to reseat you ourselves to avoid any delays." Amani froze. Reseat her? She wasn't refusing to follow rules. She wasn't causing trouble. She was sitting quietly in the seat that was paid for. She wasn't doing anything wrong. But the way he said it made her feel like a problem. Her fingers fumbled with her phone. Her heart hammered against her ribs so loudly, she was sure people could hear it. She unlocked the phone, opened her messages, and found the last text from her dad. "Dad, you're going to do amazing. Call if you need anything. Love you." She didn't even think. Her thumbs moved fast, half shaking. Amani, "Daddy, help. They want me to give up my seat. Won't leave me alone. Please, hurry." She hit send. For a second, all she could hear was the sound of people shuffling bags and clicking their seatbelts. The airplane doors were still open. Boarding was almost done. Her throat felt tight, like she might cry, but she bit the inside of her cheek hard enough to hurt. She wasn't going to cry in front of them. The man and the flight attendant stepped away, whispering in low voices, throwing quick glances in her direction. Amani stared at her phone, willing it to buzz, to light up, to bring her dad's calm voice into her hands. 2 minutes passed, then 3. Passengers were getting restless. A few people in economy class were standing in the aisle, waiting to move. The pilot made an announcement about preparing for takeoff, his voice cheerful and oblivious to the storm brewing in the cabin. And then, her phone buzzed. "Christopher Jefferson, stay calm. Do not move. I'm handling it. Keep phone close." A second later, another buzz. "Christopher Jefferson, do they know who you are yet?" "They're about to." Amani didn't fully understand what her dad meant, but a small, fierce hope flared in her chest. She tucked the phone under her leg and folded her hands in her lap. She wasn't moving. She wasn't budging. Not until her dad said otherwise. But while she waited, something started happening that made it clear. Her father's call wasn't just causing waves. It was causing a full-blown earthquake. The plane hadn't even left the ground, but inside the cabin, you could feel it. Something had shifted. It started small. The man in the suit, who had been so confident a few minutes ago, suddenly looked stiff, his hand clenching and unclenching by his side. The flight attendant kept glancing toward the cockpit, her polished smile completely gone now. Amani sat perfectly still, watching everything. A few rows ahead, a passenger pulled out his phone too, whispering to his seatmate. Word was spreading, even if nobody knew exactly what was going on yet. A different flight attendant, one Amani hadn't seen before, walked briskly down the aisle. She leaned in and whispered something into the suited man's ear. His face paled almost immediately. The pilot's voice crackled over the speaker again, but this time he sounded unsure, hesitant. Folks, we'll be experiencing a slight delay as we complete some final checks." Amani's phone buzzed again. She lifted it quietly. "Christopher Jefferson, stay seated. You're doing perfect. They're trying to figure out how deep they're in it." A few seconds later, another text. "Christopher Jefferson, just got off the phone with the COO. He knows your name now, and mine." Amani didn't know much about airline hierarchies, but she understood one thing. When your dad talks to the chief operating officer before the plane even leaves the gate, you're not just another passenger anymore. Suddenly, the man in the suit was back by her seat, but this time his whole attitude had changed. He knelt awkwardly beside her, speaking so low she almost didn't catch it. "Miss Jefferson," he said, his voice cracking slightly, "there's been a misunderstanding. Of course you can stay in your seat. We apologize for the inconvenience." She stared at him. Part of her wanted to shout. Part of her wanted to cry. Mostly, she just wanted her dad. She nodded slowly, folding her hands tightly in her lap. The man stood up quickly and rushed to the front of the plane, where a small group of uniformed crew members had gathered. They were arguing now, quietly, but not quietly enough. Passengers turned in their seats to watch. Whispers floated through the air like smoke. Another buzz from her phone. "Christopher Jefferson, you'll see a few people leave. Stay calm. Nothing you did was wrong. Remember that." Sure enough, minutes later, the man in the suit, the flight attendant who first approached her, and 2 other staff members collected their things, and one by one, exited the plane. The door closed behind them with a heavy thud. The new crew took over without saying a word to her. They reset the flight as if none of it had happened. Drinks were poured, safety instructions were given, passengers settled back into their seats, casting glances at Amani that were part curiosity, part quiet respect. Amani leaned back against her headrest, feeling the first deep breath of relief all afternoon. But while the plane finally lifted off into the sky, what happened on that flight was only the beginning of a much bigger storm. When Imani finally walked through the sliding doors of the San Diego airport later that evening, her dad was waiting for her, tall, steady, with his arms wide open. She dropped her backpack and ran straight into them. For a minute, neither of them spoke. He just held her tight, one hand smoothing down her braids the way he used to when she was little and scared of thunderstorms. When he finally pulled back, he looked her straight in the eyes. "You stood your ground," he said quietly. "I'm proud of you." Imani didn't realize how much she needed to hear that until the words hit her. They rode home in silence for a while, the hum of the freeway wrapping around them like a blanket. Then, as the city lights blurred past, Imani asked the question that had been burning in her chest since she sent that first panicked text. "Dad, why me?" He glanced at her, one hand on the steering wheel. "Sometimes people see what they expect to see," he said. "They thought you didn't belong up there. They thought you were small enough to push around." He paused. "But you're not small, Imani. You're never small. And when someone tries to treat you that way, you stand tall. You stay planted. You let your voice be heard, even if your hands are shaking." The next morning, the story exploded. Someone on the plane had tweeted about the scene they witnessed, then another, then a local news outlet picked it up. By the end of the day, it wasn't just airline staff who were answering for what happened. It was the airline itself. Statements were released, apologies were made, policies were updated publicly. And the crew members who had pressured Imani, they were no longer employed. People around the country read Imani's story and remembered times they had been told, silently or out loud, that they didn't belong. Parents hugged their kids tighter, strangers sent letters. Teachers brought it up in classrooms. It was bigger than a plane ride now. It was about who gets to feel like they belong and who gets asked to move. Imani didn't want to be famous. She didn't want a spotlight. She just wanted to go back to reading her books and dreaming about building rockets one day. But when her dad asked if she wanted to say something publicly, she thought about it long and hard, and finally, she stood in front of a camera, straightened her small shoulders, and said, "I was taught that if you earn your seat, you don't have to move for anyone. Not because you're young. Not because you look different. Not because someone says you don't belong. If you worked for it, it's yours. You stay." Her voice shook a little. She didn't care, because sometimes it's the smallest voices that carry the farthest. And sometimes, standing your ground quietly can be louder than shouting. You don't have to shout to take up space. You don't have to fight ugly to fight back. Standing your ground with calm, steady courage can change more than your own life. It can open the door for someone else behind you. Next time you see someone being pushed out of their seat, whatever that seat may be, stand with them. Stand for them. Sometimes all it takes is one voice to remind the world, we belong too.